Hail and well met Slayers of Giants. I know. I'm a bit behind on getting you Chapter 24. We've got a very busy week getting ready for Portland Pride. Come see us here at Booth 9 if you're around this weekend. But I'm working on the chapter, and I will release it as soon as I can get it written and recorded. However, there's something I want to talk about now because it's even more timely. Yes, believe it or not, even more timely than my story about knights errant and their magical familiars wandering around the American countryside righting wrongs. So we've had some events in the news, but those events are not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the reactions I'm seeing. And I know I may not be seeing a representative sample of those reactions, so maybe I'm way off base. But I have a feeling the question of how we speak about the dead is going to be a very live one soon. And it ought to be. Because our answer is not for the dead. It's for us. For those of you who missed it, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham passed away. And there's a mini trial going on to see if the trial for the alleged shooter of Charlie Kirk can move forward. And Mitch McConnell's staff put out a statement trying to reassure everyone he's not dead. Which means he totally isn't, because having your people put out a statement and proof of life photo is completely normal for a senator's staff to have to do. And the President of the United States is in such terrible shape that basically every time he's on camera, people are clicking an inverted version of one of those blank days since an on-the-job accident posters, only it's blank days since he last made a public appearance. And it's back down to 0, so we know not to start the global party in the streets quite yet. And before that party, and before anyone says, remember, don't speak ill of the dead, and before we know whether Mitch McConnell is still with us, as the pundits and politicians are practicing with their reactions, using the passing of Lindsey Graham as a testing ground, I want you to consider something. At the end of my last video, where I interviewed Reckless Ben, I talked about how important it is to recognize we can be wrong, to acknowledge error when we become aware of it, and to give grace and kudos to people who are brave enough to admit they were wrong in public, in a world that often feels like it's full of people looking for that gotcha moment. We need to normalize good gotchas, catch people in the act of humbling themselves, and go out of our way to say, way to go. Thank you for admitting you were wrong. Welcome back to the community. Because that's really what apologies are all about, right? They're about asking to be let back into the community. And that's important. We should be letting people back in. A community that can afford some forgiveness that's not too rigidly dogmatic is a stronger community. But a community does need to have an identity. Or it's not a community. It needs to have values. It needs to have rules, both spoken and unspoken. It needs to provide shared art and culture, shared narrative, a somewhat cohesive sense of reality. Yes, a strong, vibrant community can contain many languages, many cultures, many religions, people who come into it from different communities. That's good. And it can even contain some tension. Some percentage of people saying, I wish those people weren't part of this community, but I respect our community, our values, our rules enough to let them be a part of us, because that's what our values and rules dictate. But a community cannot endure, or it can endure, but not as a just society, if its norms tolerate the dehumanization of its own populace. Whether that dehumanization is based on race or gender or sexual orientation or religion or previous nationality or criminal history, a society can't say, these people are subhuman and can't be full members of society. Or else it's not a real, thriving, healthy community. So what do we do when we want to be forgiving and tolerant and open, but we have an ideological cancer within a community that says, these people aren't really people? There's a solution to this, but you're going to have to bear with me, because your first inclination is going to be to reject this outright. But stick with me. Here's the solution. Hold a grudge. Now, I know, we've all been taught that holding grudges is inherently bad. A few years ago, I had a situation in which I had a falling out with someone who hurt me very badly. And one of the things I learned in the aftermath is that there are people, well-meaning, loving people, who will tell you you need to forgive someone in order to move on. That forgiveness is the key to a happy life, that holding on to your anger is bad for your health and well-being. In case you need someone in your life to counterbalance those folks, let me say this very clearly. They are wrong. That is wrong. Sure, forgiveness is a virtuous act when it's employed correctly, but it's not universally good. If someone is trying to rebuild their connection to a community by acknowledging the harm they have caused and asking for forgiveness, and you believe their apology and you can find it in your heart to forgive them, that's great. Relationships between humans are complicated machines that require maintenance, and forgiveness is essential repair work. But anger, stick with me here, is good. Our ancestors evolved the ability to remember pain for a long time as a survival mechanism for a reason. If the saber-toothed tiger scratches you and you escape and make it back to your cave, you don't forgive the saber-toothed tiger and head back to see if it will play nice tomorrow. You remember. You stay angry. And if you are an evolved human being, you hold on to that memory even after the scratch has healed. Why? So you don't go back and see if the saber-toothed tiger wants to be friends. Your ancestors who forgave everyone too easily aren't your ancestors. They died. You evolved from people who could remember, who could hold a grudge. It kept them alive. Also, and this will be an unpopular thing to mention, the people who were most likely to tell me to forgive and let go of my anger did so because they'd learned that lesson from their religious traditions. And that's worth unpacking. Why, if you are the priest caste in a hierarchical religious order, do you want to teach people they should never be angry, should always forgive? Is it because this will remind them that a higher power has forgiven them, and their forgiveness will make them humble, and then everyone will give everyone else the necessary grace to create a community of equality? I think that's often the argument, and I see the appeal. It's not until you get out of one of those hierarchical religious institutions that you can unpack that and see the argument for what it is. Complete bunk. Here you have someone with more power, a religious authority, demanding forgiveness be treated as a virtue, and the justification is that a higher power wants you to forgive. Notice, the lesson isn't that forgiveness creates equality. It's that forgiveness is dictated by hierarchy. And why? Because it preserves hierarchy. If someone is abusing power, they have all the incentive to demand forgiveness. And saying, you should forgive me because the guy who immolated the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, who ordered the slaughter of Canaanites down unto the 4th generation, who ordered the sacrifice of his own son to show you the depth of his love for you, that guy says forgive. So forgive me when I abuse my power as your priest or pastor or bishop or imam or rabbi or whatever. That person is not creating equality among all believers. They are preserving hierarchy to protect the powerful from accountability. Instead, when it comes to forgiveness, I encourage you to participate in something I call rational evaluation of the irrational. Try as best you can to logically evaluate your feelings. I know this seems contradictory, even paradoxical, but it's not. This is what is so great about your human brain. You have this ability. You can say, this feeling I am having, how is it working? What is it telling me? And logic doesn't just win. You will not be able to say, well, I have coldly decided the feeling isn't helpful, so I'm turning it off. But the feeling doesn't unilaterally win just because it persists either. They are in conversation with one another. Maybe the feeling is telling you something you need to keep listening to. Maybe your reason is telling you something about how to act or not act on that feeling. Let them hash that out. Rationally evaluate the irrational. You've probably heard people fail at this out loud in real time. For example, they're in a horrible, hurtful relationship, maybe one in which they are being harmed, maybe one where they are doing the harm, maybe both. And you say, "Why are you still in this relationship?" And they say, "Because I love her, him, them." Love is important. Sometimes I think it's the most important thing there is, the point of life. Maybe. I don't pretend to have found certainty about that. But I recognize love is vital. It is what binds us together in individual relationships and in community. It gives us greater satisfaction than wealth, than material comfort, than freedom. But a rational evaluation of the irrational dictates that a person needs to be able to say, "Yes, I have this feeling, and I should listen to that. It's telling me something about this person that is valuable. But the relationship is one that is not healthy for me, or this other person, or both." So the love itself doesn't need to dictate that we stay together. Maybe it's just teaching me to look for the characteristics I like in this person so I can find those in someone else. Or maybe it's telling me what characteristics I like so I can identify those and then work out whether those characteristics are ones that are putting me in bad relationships, then learn how to not love those in the future. The love is still good, still useful, but it doesn't have to be the reason to preserve that relationship. In the same way, anger is something to listen to. It doesn't have to mean you harm that other person, or even wish harm upon them. When you've been scratched by the saber-toothed tiger, you don't have to go out looking for the tiger. Just stay in your cave and be mad at it. That's better. But stay mad. And that's what brings me to Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell and Charlie Kirk and Donald Trump. Perform this rational evaluation of the irrational when asking yourself if these people deserve your forgiveness post-mortem. Does forgiving them help unburden you of a needless stress? Or would that forgiveness preserve a hateful ideology which will cause more harm in the future if it isn't addressed? Is the continued anger at these men, who never apologized, valuable if it reminds us not to tolerate the intolerable? After Lindsey Graham's passing, a bunch of prominent voices, either in politics or in the media, are doing the "Don't Speak Ill of the Dead" tour. And while Mitch McConnell is playing the role of Schrödinger senator, a lot of people are having a lot of fun talking about whether or not he's alive, but there seems to be far less talk about what he did when he was certainly alive, and when he's certainly dead, there will be some amount of hagiography about his accomplishments that glances over his sins because he's passed away. As I'm watching coverage of the Charlie Kirk trial, Part 1, there's this palpable fear in the coverage of sounding like anyone is justifying political violence. And I understand where that is coming from. I don't want to live in a world where wackadoos assassinate political commentators. But I also don't want to live in a world where women die of sepsis in hospital parking lots because their doctors are too afraid to remove their stillborn fetuses because they might be accused of performing an abortion and go to jail. That death in a parking lot is an act of political violence. And I don't want to live in a world where some trans guy with a beard has to decide if he's going to walk into the women's room and get his ass kicked before showing his birth certificate, or go into the men's room and get arrested after showing his birth certificate. That's political violence. I don't want to live in a world where my tax dollars build concentration camps, the president and his cronies line their pockets with private prison dollars, and millions of people who were encouraged to come here by our financial system, then forced to live in the shadows by the people who desperately needed them to provide food and home health care and a whole bunch of other necessary goods and services, suddenly decide to round them all up and kill who knows how many of them using an unaccountable secret police force that is rampaging through American streets, killing other people who happen to get in the way of the fundamentally evil work they have agreed to do. That, too, is political violence. The ICE agents who killed an innocent man in Texas and another in Maine, and however many innocent people died in the camps this last week, are just as much murderers as whoever shot Charlie Kirk. It's political violence, and it's unacceptable. Pete Buttigieg gave a speech this last week about what comes after Trump. He talked about how, quote, "We gotta get busy welcoming others into our coalition, reaching out to those who might have believed what they were told about government for the forgotten man or no new wars, reaching out to them saying, he doesn't deserve you." Sure. Absolutely. People who voted for Donald Trump and Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell, who listened to people like Charlie Kirk as he made racist and sexist and other hateful comments and cheered him on, they can absolutely cast their ballots for something other than more of the same. They can do so because they want the price of gas to come down. Fine. But before Mayor Pete convinces anybody to get too busy trying to win those folks over, we need to be very clear about why. Are we winning them over because we want them to feel comfortable with their worldview and we're willing to embrace some of their ideology in order to build a governing majority? Or are we saying, yeah, come vote for us because your gas prices are high, but don't you dare expect us to adopt your policy proposals or rhetoric in order to get your votes just because the people you elected before were disasters? It's a big difference, and it's super important. And I want to make this very clear to any politician, left, right, center, Democrat, Republican, third party, or no party. If you play footsie with fascists, you will lose. Now, I know, as soon as I use the word fascism, a bunch of people freak out. And I get it. In our lifetimes, we've only heard the word used as an insult, and we've often heard it misapplied, so it just seems like a slur. But it really does mean something. And 100 years ago, people wore it as a badge of honor. Then they got their asses handed to them in World War II, and they went underground. And they spent the next 100 years saying, we're not fascists. So people forgot what fascism means, and just decided it means boogeymen. And no one says, I want to be part of the boogeyman party. So let me be very clear. Fascism is right-wing, hyper-nationalist, sexist, authoritarian corporatism. That's what it meant to the people who made up the word. They literally died for their cause, so I think they were a little more committed to knowing what the word means than you are. So before you hop in the comments and tell me about how the left is fascist, or feminists are fascist, or people who are anti-corporation are fascist, save your keystrokes, because they make you sound stupid. You may be a right-wing, sexist, hyper-nationalist, authoritarian corporatist who doesn't like being called a fascist. Too bad. You may think left-wingers are taking your rights away by making you live next to Steve and Todd and acknowledging someone's they-them pronouns, and that really hurts your feelings, and you want to call them authoritarians. Fine. There have been left-wing authoritarians. But they weren't fascists. There are left-leaning authoritarians. I'm not a supporter of any kind of authoritarians, and if I seriously believed left-wing authoritarianism was going to be putting people in camps the way Stalin did, I would be raging against left-wing authoritarians. If I lived in North Korea, I'd be trying to escape, so I could be railing against Kim Jong-un, a left-wing authoritarian. But that's not the country I live in. I'm railing against fascism because that's what we have here in the US, and it's growing more powerful, and pretending it's not is a great way to help it get worse. So, to all the aspiring politicians and pundits figuring out how you will get clicks and clout and votes when Trump dies, or McConnell dies, or when figuring out how to talk about Lindsey Graham's death or Charlie Kirk's death, even if you're only motivated by self-interest, Take my advice. Don't play footsie with fascists. You won't benefit. Fascists like a strong man. It's intrinsic to the ideology. Trying to meet them halfway doesn't work. You don't seem tough. You seem like a weak suck-up. To paraphrase Harry S. Truman, if you offer fascists a choice between a full-on fascist or a person trying to peel off a few fascist votes, they'll choose the fascist every time. You are actually better off to say, screw fascism. Fascists will respect you more. I understand you need to show moderates who've been scared by all the chaos that you're not scary. I get it. That's the only way to get to 50% plus 1 and actually get anything done. You can't, and morally speaking shouldn't, try to appeal to fascists, but you also can't persuade moderates by saying you'll just lock up the fascists in camps. Then you're just the left-wing authoritarian they've been taught to be afraid of. So how do you pledge to hold the corrupt and immoral accountable without making Trump voters think you're going to treat them the way they want to treat undocumented immigrants and little girls in Iran and fishermen in the Caribbean? There is a way. And it's not telling warm anecdotes about the fun times you had with Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell in the back room in the Senate. And it's not tying yourself in knots trying to pretend Charlie Kirk was a good person just to let people know you oppose political violence. And it's not going to be talking about whatever positive thing you can think to say about Donald Trump when he's gone. I honestly cannot think of what you would even come up with. Winner of the FIFA Peace Prize? Don't try. It won't work. Instead, we have a solution. And it doesn't come from me. I'm nobody's hero. I'm a guy who tried to escape the US so he could keep publishing anti-fascist books without going to prison. And everybody said, that was crazy. And now Americans are literally doing 50 years for printing anti-fascist zines. But I failed to make it work, and had to come back with my tail between my legs, so if you want to ignore the funny-looking bald guy with the eyebrow piercings, I don't blame you. I'm not a big fan of him either. Instead, please listen to Frederick Douglass. Well, listen to Tad Stormer, the historian, when he tells you to listen to Frederick Douglass. Because Douglass models the solution for every politician and pundit trying to figure out how to thread the needle between speaking about the dead and criticizing their ideology. It can be done. It ought to be done. It must be done if we're ever going to get to a place where the individuals can be welcomed back into the community, but the hateful ideology can be left in the dustbin of history. In 1871, Frederick Douglass was asked to speak at a Memorial Day celebration at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington National Cemetery. Now think about that. He was a formerly enslaved man asked to stand behind a podium and honor the people who fought against and for his own enslavement. You think figuring out how to talk about Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell and Charlie Kirk and, at some point, a deceased Donald Trump is tricky? Imagine what he was being asked to do. And here's what he said. Friends and fellow citizens, tarry here for a moment. My words shall be few and simple. The solemn rites of this hour and place call for no lengthened speech. There is, in the very air of this resting ground of the unknown dead, a silent, subtle, and all-pervading eloquence, far more touching, impressive, and thrilling than living lips have ever uttered. Into the measureless depth of every loyal soul it is now whispering lessons of all that is most precious, priceless, holiest, and most enduring in human existence. Dark and sad will be the hour to this nation when it forgets to pay grateful homage to its greatest benefactors. The offering we bring today is due alike to the patriot soldiers dead and their noble comrades who still live, for, whether living or dead, whether in time or eternity, the loyal soldiers who periled all for the country and freedom are one and inseparable. Those unknown heroes, whose whitened bones have been piously gathered here, and whose green graves are now strewn with sweet and beautiful flowers, choice emblems alike of pure hearts and brave spirits, reached in their glorious career that last and highest point of nobleness, beyond which human power cannot go. They died for their country. No loftier tribute can be paid to the most illustrious of all the benefactors of mankind than we pay to these unrecognized soldiers when we write above their graves this shining epitaph. When the dark and vengeful spirit of slavery, always ambitious, preferring to rule in hell than to serve in heaven, fired the Southern heart, and stirred all the malign elements of discord, when our great republic, the hope of freedom and self-government throughout the world, had reached the point of supreme peril, where the union of these states was torn and rent asunder at the center, and the armies of a gigantic rebellion came forth with broad blades and bloody hands to destroy the very foundation of American society, the unknown braves who slumber in these graves flung themselves into the yawning chasm where cannon roared and bullets whistled, fought and fell. They died for their country. We are sometimes asked, in the name of patriotism, to forget the merits of this fearful struggle, and to remember with equal admiration those who struck at the nation's life and those who struck to save it, those who fought for slavery and those who fought for liberty and justice. I am no minister of malice. I would not strike the fallen. I would not repel the repellent, but may my right hand forget its cunning, and my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if I forget the difference between the parties to that terrible, protracted, and bloody conflict. If we ought to forget a war which has filled our land with widows and orphans, which has made stumps of men of the very flower of their youth, sent them on the journey of life, armless, legless, maimed and mutilated, which has piled up a debt heavier than a mountain of gold, swept uncounted thousands of men into bloody graves, and planted agony at 1,000,000 hearthstones. I say, if this war is to be forgotten, I ask in the name of all things sacred, what shall men remember? The essence and significance of our devotion here today is not to be found in the fact that these men whose remains fill these graves were brave in battle. If we meant simply to show our sense of the worth of bravery, we should find enough to kindle admiration on both sides. In the raging storm of fire and blood, in the fierce torrent of shot and shell, of sword and bayonet, whether on horse or foot, unflinching courage marked the rebel not less than the loyal soldier. But we are not here to applaud manly courage only, as it has been displayed in the noble cause. We must never forget that victory to the rebellion meant death to the republic. We must never forget that the loyal soldiers who rest beneath this sod flung themselves between the nation and the nation's destroyers. If today we have a country not boiling in the agony of blood like France, if now we have a united country no longer cursed by the hell-black system of human bondage, if the American name is no longer a byword and a hissing to mocking earth, if the Star-Spangled Banner floats only over free American citizens in every quarter of the land, and our country has before it a long and glorious career of justice, liberty, and civilization, we are indebted to the unselfish devotion of the noble army who rest in these honored graves all around us. I hope you caught that. Army. Singular. Not armies, not both sides. I think it's as clear today as it was in 1871. And he didn't say, let's talk about the price of eggs. He didn't say, I don't like talking about politics. And he didn't say, we just need to move on and forget and let this happen again. He could have done any of those things. Weak, spineless politicians try out those excuses all the time because they hear scared, overwhelmed voters say them, and overpriced consultants report those phrases from focus groups, and the politicians want to give people what they think they want. But that's not leadership. What we need is someone who will tell us what Frederick Douglass told us. We are sometimes asked in the name of patriotism to forget the merits of this fearful struggle, and to remember with equal admiration those who struck at the nation's life, and those who struck to save it, those who fought for slavery, and those who fought for liberty and justice. Now, Frederick Douglass didn't win any elections. and I certainly won't either. So maybe politicians won't be as brave as Frederick Douglass because they know the American people are not willing to hear what he was telling us. But if you believe in what's best for the country, not just what's best for your next election, do not try to lean into Trumpism to peel off a few votes. When you speak of Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, Charlie Kirk, and Donald Trump, may your right hand forget its cunning and your tongue cleave to the roof of your mouth if you forget the difference between the parties to this terrible, protracted, and bloody regime. Maybe you will decide it's unseemly to dance on a grave. That's fine. I think you're going to miss out on a heck of a party at some point in the near future, but no one should be obligated to attend a party, and people attending parties out of obligation are giant bummers. Stay home. But if someone sticks a microphone in your face the next day, please remember Frederick Douglass' words. And when we are asked whether it is in the name of decorum or civility or bipartisanship or, as Douglass said, in the name of patriotism, to forget the merits of this fearful struggle, and to remember with equal admiration those who struck at the nation's life and those who struck to save it, please remember, Lindsey Graham cannot hear you. But our children are trying to figure out if you want them to be like Lindsey Graham or not be like Lindsey Graham. Like Mitch McConnell or Charlie Kirk or Donald Trump or, a decent human being. And your words will tell them, and tell all of us, about your values. Yes, there is a kindness in trying not to pick on dead people who can't defend themselves, but not at the expense of protecting their hatefulness towards living, breathing people. You don't have to do what Douglass referred to as striking the fallen, but be very careful not to heap praise upon the bleached bones of the wrong army.